Welcome to the third episode of Understand the Code. My name is Patel, and today we're looking at a password generator. So let's get started and take a look at our goals for this code. So the goals we have outlined are to use a GUI, and with that we want to generate passwords. We want our user to determine the strength of their password, so weak or strong, and to determine the length of their password. Then we want to save those passwords to the clipboard so they can paste them wherever they want to. And the steps you want to take to accomplish this are to basically use the tkinter function that we used in episode 2 of Understand the Code. And as a quick refresher, the tkinter function is basically the inverse of the ORD function and basically returns a string for an integer between 0 and 225. So if I gave the function the parameter of 97, it would return the letter A. So let's get started and take a look at how we want this to run. So once you press play on this program, a nice GUI just pops up and asks us to select the strength of the password we want. So we could select something like strong. And then we can select the length of the password we want. So we could do something between 5 and 10 characters. So let's just get started with 8. And once you press submit, it pops up right here. And as we outlined in our goals, we want to be able to paste this anywhere. So if you come over to this text document, we just press Control V or Command V, it pops up. And if we try this again with, say, a weak password with 5 characters and submit that, then again, we can come down here, Control V. And taking a look at this GUI, we can see that we are using tkinter. We have a label here, and then 2 radio buttons, a label, a option box, a button, and then a label down here. So that's exactly what we'll be mimicking in our code. So let's get started writing this code. Alright, so let's get started. So we're here in PyCharm, and the first things we need to do are to import the necessary libraries. So first of all, we're going to need our import random import paperclip, and then we're going to import tkinter as tk. We're not going to use a wildcard import. So the import random, we're going to use the random library to basically randomize our passwords. We can use paperclip to copy it to our clipboard, and then we're going to use tkinter to create our GUI. So the first thing we can do is actually create a class. We can call that class our app. And within that, let's get started. We will do the init self. So what we first need to establish are the necessary variables for tkinter. So that would be self.root is equal to tk.tk. And then we'll have, as always, self.root.mainLoop. And between those things, let's give our window a title. So we'll do self.root.title. We will call it password generator. And underneath that, we can specify the geometry of the window. So it'll be self.root.geometry. And we'll use the same dimensions used in the previous demonstration of the code. So that will be 400 by 200. After that, we need to establish for our radio boxes a couple of variables. So that would be self.choice, which I will explain later in the video. So we have self.choice is actually equal to tk.string variable. And then we have our self.pass length, which will represent the password length that we'll be using, is equal to tk.integer variable. And then after that, we'll be creating a function. We'll be using a function called, which I will be naming create UI. So we'll write that in here for now. The error will go away after we actually create the function. So let's get started with our function. As I said before, we're going to call it create UI. Within that, we first have to specify the number of options we want to have when we're selecting our password length. So as I showed in the demonstration, we had choices between 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 characters. So we can make that a list under the variable selection. These are all integer values, so we'll just do 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You can of course add any more numbers or get rid of any numbers. And like I showed in the demonstration, we also had that first label. And I didn't really see a need to give it a name. It was just make a label there. So that would go under self.root. And the text basically just said, select the string of the password you want. And the font we could just use times 18 and then underline it, I guess. And then basically we just pack that onto the main window. In our next line, we also had our first radio button. And for that, we can use our first self variable. We can call it self.strong. And that's basically just going to be a radio button. And that radio button is going to go under self.root. The text we're going to use for it is just to say strong. If you want to pick a strong variable or a strong password, just click this. The value that it will return is the string strong without the uppercase S. And then the variable that it corresponds to, as we specified above, is self.choice, which we specified right here as a string variable. And then we can take self.strong and we can just pack it on to self.root. So we have our strong choice, but we also need our weak choice. So with that, we can create self.weak. TK, we'll call it, it's a radio button, which is similar to, or exactly like self.strong, will go under self.root. It'll just have the text of weak. It'll have the value of weak without any capitals, and it will correspond with the same variable, which is self.choice. And then we can just pack it on to self.root. So we have our two radio buttons. We then had another label, and of course there is really no need to give it another label. We didn't have to give it another variable. So similar to our first label, we can just do tk.label self.root. Basically this is going to ask us how long we want our password to be. So we'll just say select the length of the password you want. And just like our first label, we can use the same font. So we'll be doing times 18 and then we'll underline it. And then we can just pack that on. After label, we then had our option menu. So we can give that the variable name self.length, and we'll do tk.optionMenu self.root, and then we'll basically just use self.passLength as our variable that it responds to, which we specified up here, self.passLength. So I'll just write that in right here, passLength. And then the value it'll actually have is the selection we had right here. But we basically add like the little star, so it knows not to put in a list, but the different elements within that list. And we'll take a look at that once we actually run our code. And then once we've basically created self.length, we can just pack it on to the root. Pack. And then once we're done with that, we can then create a button. And of course, there's still no need to give this button a variable name. So we can just do tk.button self.root, and we'll just say that it's a submit button. So we'll just say submit, and then the command we're going to give it, we will specify it in another function, but we'll just call that one, let's call it self.create. That's what we'll call it. And then basically we'll just pack that on to our root. So that's basically the general UI of our GUI. And then we can create our second function, which is where we actually create our password. So we'll define it, we'll call it create, and you see the error that was here went away. So once we have that, we can start. So the first thing we can do is just say, define what password is. Password is just an empty string. And then once they actually select their choice, they press submit, we want to get what self.choice has. We're going to get what it has. And if it ends up being weak, because remember, if the value weak, it responds to self.choice. So if we get self.choice and it returns weak, that means that the weak radio button has been pressed. So if it comes out to being weak, that means they want a weak password. So if they do that, then for I in range of the pass length that they wanted, if we get that, because the number that they submit here at pass length, it'll respond to this integer variable, and we can take that in to see how long they actually want their password to be. So once we do that, this is where our chr function basically comes in. So basically, in our random function as well, we're going to add that to our password string, and it's just going to be the chr of a random integer randint that is between 65 and 126. And after we finish this code, I'll go over why we are using those numbers. So I'll move that down a little bit. So once we do that, we basically just want to configure, or actually I totally forgot, we have to create a label at the bottom of our UI itself. We can just call it response. It's going to be a label. Pretty simple. It'll go on self.root, and for now the text will be absolutely nothing. And then we can just pack it on to that. I totally forgot about that. We can just pack it on to the root. Anyway, coming back to our create function. Once we've created our password, we can then put it at the bottom. So to do that, all we need to do is just take our self.response label, and we'll just configure it so that the text ends up being our password. And for font, we should make it a little bit bigger, more obvious. So we can just do times 20 and then make it bold. And then remember, we also specified in our goals that we wanted to save it to our clipboard. So this is where we use paperclip. So we'll just do paperclip dot copy our password. So that's what's going to happen if we pick a weak password. What if we want a strong password? So since there's only weak and strong, we don't have to specify if self.choice.get returns strong. We can just say else. We don't need to have another, we don't have to have an else if statement. So else, we already know it's going to be strong, so it's basically the same thing. For I in range self.passlength.get, we want to add to our password the chr of a random integer that is between 33 and a 126. But this is a strong password, so we can add a mystery element at the end. So we'll just subtract 1 here. So once we do that, once we exit our for loop, let's just add another component to our password, another figure. And that can just be the chr of a random integer between 33 and 47. And once we do that, we can basically do the same exact things we did here. So we'll just copy that, we'll paste down here. Everything should fit together the same. And now that we have that, all we need to do is create an instance of our class. We can just say app is equal to app. So if we go ahead, pull this little menu up, and then we run this, it takes us to our code right here. So let's try and run this. I will click strong and 10, and it seems to work. So now I'll go over why we actually had to specify those seemingly random integers. So now I want to go over why did I specifically use these numbers here? Why was I mainly between the numbers 33 and 126? Well, remember, we're using the chr function. So to take a look at this, to take a better look at this, we can take a look at this for loop. So for I in range of 0 to 225, we want to print what I is, and then what the chr of that basically returns. So I've already run it for us here. So if I pull this up, we can see that for a lot of those I values, nothing is coming up. But once we hit 33, we start to see some numbers and some symbols. And then once we go all the way to 126, it happens without any interruptions. And then we have a couple of interruptions, and it resumes back at 161. But these are some relatively uncommon characters, so I thought that it was better to stay between the 33 and 126 range, where there's a lot of familiar characters that everyone could type out or find on their keyboard. So that's mainly why when we specified which CHRs to use, we wanted to use a random integer between 33 and 126, because anything beyond that is either not there or it's hard to find. And then with our strong password, in order to differentiate that from our weak password, we wanted our weak password to only be between 65, which is where the capital letter A starts, to 126, which is the A, which was the ending of our thing. But if we opened up to 33 to 126, we had more lowercase numbers, special characters, and then at the end we just added anything between 33 and 47, which were all special characters. That was the only real way to differentiate a strong and a weak password. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and stay tuned for the